We can probably go ahead and get started. Hopefully, more folks will join as we get going, because I do think this is a great topic folks want to hear about, and we've got some good stuff to talk about later too. But thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll just get through some procedural stuff real quick. I sent around the minutes that Aaron did such a nice job with from September and October. I neglected to bring up the September minutes at the October meeting. So unless anybody has any issues with those, we'll just move right through. I don't think we need to, there's any kind of approval process for those. Everybody good? All right, glad to hear it. So we'll just kick it right off. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Chris Carmody is with GrayRobinson. Been there for what, Chris, probably almost 15 years now?
Yes, it has been 15.
He is a designated professional lobbyist from the Florida Association of Professional Lobbyists, is an attorney admitted to practice in all Florida courts, has substantial experience handling all sorts of different government relations matters, higher education, law. He's on, Chris, are you on the board of the Florida Sports Foundation, or are you just their general counsel?
And technically that puts me on the board, but I am the general counsel for the Sports Commission, Greater Orlando.
Greater Orlando Sports Commission, thank you. Chris and I used to work together when he represented Space Florida. Seems like yesterday, now more than a decade ago. Just an overall great guy. So thank you, Chris, for joining us and giving us a feel of what the upcoming legislative session is going to look like.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for including me, Chris. And Chris, we got to remind folks, like, that Space Florida, when we repped them, that was not such a sexy thing. We were fighting for those incentives that now lead to Elon Musk, doing backflips in space and Bezos and everybody else.
Yeah, times were pretty challenging back then, for sure.
I think those are the only incentives Americans for Prosperity haven't eliminated from the Tallahassee budget. So
and continue not to fight.
Yeah,
pretty
so
amazing.
just continue, don't tell anybody. There's some really nice incentives out there, synthetic leasing and all that Chris and us helped provide for. But that's not why you guys tuned in. You probably don't even know I was going to be part of this agenda, so I apologize in advance. But I'm going to share my screen so I can give you this presentation they helped me put together. And I'm going to see if I can make it into a show as well and still keep you guys somewhere where I can see it. Here we go. Can everyone see that?
Yep, we're good.
Perfect. Well, as you can see, this is our firm's name, so I'm not going to belabor you with that. My name below there. This was going to be about legislative session, right? When Chris reached out, we talked about that. But of course, as you know, breaking news, a lot has happened in the last month, and some of this you probably saw coming, right? Like, you all are very much in touch with what's going on in your community, in your backyard. I have a good number of clients, many private, many public. For my public clients, I kept telling them, especially the counties, I represent Orange County. As you know, they had a vaccine mandate for employees or still do technically, and we'll see, that won't survive after next week. But I kept telling them, I was like, the temperature is rising in Tallahassee. The governor is upset. His staff is upset. They're not going to be letting this go anytime soon. I said, so we just need to be prepared for this. And the same thing with school boards, right? We told them, like, I think most folks get why the schools were requiring masks, even if the governor and others didn't like it. But nevertheless, the governor and Commissioner Corcoran, they did not want it, and they were going to double down whatever rules they needed to create out of Board of Education, what have you. So the fact that there was a special session is not surprising. How we got here is a little more surprising, and those who are familiar with the process are going to understand what I'm saying. But and I'm going to go in there. It usually, when you have a special session, the governor coordinates very closely with the presiding officers, and the legislation that I'm going to talk to you about is already cooked, already taken care of. And kind of like the gaming special session they had earlier this year. And there's really no questions except for one or two, but they've already figured out how they're going to deal with those, and then it just goes off. This, on the other hand, was the opposite. This is very rarely will you compare Charlie Crist and DeSantis, and I think this is the only time, but this reminds me when Charlie Crist called a special session when he was running for the Senate, and the legislators are like, we don't want to go to special session. Unlike those legislators, this legislature is not going to embarrass the governor. They weren't going to leave him out on a limb. So they quietly behind closed doors got this work together and came up with some language. And the real push, and we'll get with it, was how you deal with businesses. As much as the governor's ire was at local governments and specifically school boards and the mask mandates, there was no, no faking it. He was upset with businesses that were requiring vaccines as well. And he wanted to go on them pretty hard. The presiding officers pushed back pretty strongly on that, kind of like what happened in Texas, and said businesses are businesses. They should be allowed to make decisions on their own. And so what you're seeing is a little bit of a hybrid. So let's talk through it. Next week, there's a special session in Tallahassee. They essentially canceled the committee week that was going to take place with the exception of redistricting committees. There's going to be 4 pieces of legislation in each chamber, all focused in some regard on COVID-19 mandates. Heavy emphasis on schools and local governments. And so that's the HB1 of an HB2 or SB2 of that. It is going to completely and without any doubt strip away the rights of local school boards to require masks unless they're given permission otherwise. And it's going to make clear that the Parental Bill of Rights allows parents to strip away or to opt out of any mask mandate. And that's the big kicker. Schools can still require it, but parents will now have a very clear out for their kids if they want them to not wear a mask. And the same thing for local governments. If you recall last year, they late in session, they put forward that vaccine passport legislation that if they're admitting it, and most will, it wasn't drafted in the best way, and it had plenty of room to be interpreted. And I think part of it is, and I heard multiple legislators say this, they go, oh, this won't matter in 7 months. Because I think optimistically, we all thought by the end of 2020 that this all would be done and we wouldn't be worried about any of this stuff. And there's still some stuff going on with all this. So they are, or excuse me, by the end of 2021, they thought, by this time now, they thought everything would be taken care of, but it's obviously not. And so they're going to clean up that language and make it clear that local governments cannot require vaccines of their employees, much less require it to come into their buildings. And that's going to be pretty clear. And so the Orange County one, Alachua County, I think may still have it. Those will go away once this legislation is put into effect. Now, no one's surprised by that, right? Everyone knew that the governor and his team and even the legislators were going to come after local governments. It's an easy group to pick on. Unfortunately for me, who represents a lot of them, it's easy to pick on them, but that is what it is. Now, the business side is where it gets real interesting. Our intel suggests that early on, the governor wanted to strip away the COVID immunity for businesses that require COVID vaccines, and maybe put some other penalties. The legislature pushed back hard on that. So the legislation that came out ultimately does the following, and we can get in the weeds if you want. It allows businesses to require vaccines of their employees if they want, but there's at least 4 exemptions that need to be allowed. The first are the easy ones, right? Doctor's notes, legitimate doctor's notes. I don't know how you determine if it's legitimate, but they say legitimate doctor's notes, and or religious purposes, and pregnant or expecting to be pregnant. Now, the expecting to be pregnant will be interesting, right? What does that mean? And what I mean by that is not if you're in your 20s or 30s, but if you're in your 60s and you're saying you're expecting to be pregnant, and that's why you don't want to take a shot. Like, how does a business deal with that? Hopefully you don't have that, but this is Florida, and I promise you there will be some case where someone says that, and we'll have to deal with that. As well, you have to, or you can show post-infection antibodies, which you can test for. So if you've had COVID and you believe you have antibodies, there can be testing for that to show that you still have them. And the other one is, you can wear personal protection equipment, and like a mask, if you will. And so with all this, put it in the lens of Disney, right? And some of our theme parks, like they were one of the first ones to require vaccines of their employees. And for some of the obvious reasons, right? They are a forward-facing company. Very few of their cast members are back house, right? There's a good number because they've got 67,000 employees, but most of their cast members are forward-facing. They are dealing with customers day in and day out. And Disney was trying to give some sort of security towards the guests that were coming in there, that, hey, when you come in here, you're safe because our employees are vaccinated. With them requiring the mask instead of the vaccine, that should give them what they need, because if you've been to Disney, most employees are wearing masks when they serve you the Mickey ice cream or what have you, or the Dole Whip, right? That's the pineapple ice cream. So that is the exception. But basically, this is the governor's way of saying, we're going to hold you accountable, businesses, but we're not going to take away your rights. And the other thing is there needs to be coverage. If the employer has a vaccine mandate and you get the vaccine and you have more than the just typical negative side effects, right? Like if those of you who've had the vaccine know, like it's the second one, you're pretty much out of it for a day. You feel like you've got the flu. Everyone's symptoms are different. And then you're back to normal. But if you extends beyond that, right? Because there's like the 1% of the 1% that when they've gotten the vaccine, they've actually had some really bad side effects. This would provide workers' compensation coverage for those really bad side effects. So if you get the vaccine because you were told you had to, and you actually have real negative side effects, not just the one-day hangovers, if you will, that'll be something that you're covered. So generally speaking, it's pretty lukewarm on business, meaning it's saying, hey, we're expecting y'all to play ball on this too and not just be heavy-handed, but it's not the governor and the legislature aren't going to be heavy-handed and take away the business's rights to do what they think is necessary for their business, their employees, what have you. Now, here's the interesting one, that last bullet, and then we'll move on to the 22 session. The OSHA withdrawal. You probably heard all this, and if any of your employers or you're very familiar with OSHA, technically any state can have their own OSHA plan. In fact, there's 22 states that already have an OSHA plan. Now, what's interesting with this is, and I'll be interesting to see how the politics play on this. If you look at the map of the 22 states that have it, with a few exceptions, it's mostly what we would consider liberal states, and I'll tell you why. It's sort of like constitutional rights. You have a right of privacy in our federal constitution. Everyone knows that, like your Fourth Amendment rights. You hear about it a lot with criminal law. Florida can give you a greater right of privacy, but they can't give you a lesser right of privacy, right? Like, so if your right of privacy is in your home, they can't say, well, it's only in your, only in your backyard or only in your bedroom. Like they can expand it. They can say it includes your car, it includes whatever, but they can't take away what's already there. Same thing with OSHA. Florida and all the other states, you can't have a less stringent OSHA policy on workplace safety, but you can increase it. So the reason those 22 states that already have them typically tend to be the more liberal states or those who maybe had a liberal bent here and there is because, like, think California, they wanted to go above and beyond what the federal government was requiring on workplace safety. And that sort of is on brand for California, right? It's liberal. You would expect those sort of things. So this will be some interesting politics, right? Like, I've talked to a lot of experts and they say that if Florida really legitimately tries to withdraw from OSHA, they would not be able to get out of the vaccine mandates from Joe Biden's administration. Now, how you'll get around it is the Attorney General's lawsuit that they're going, is that the emergency rule was not properly done and it's not allowed under OSHA. What I've been told by folks I trust is we can withdraw from OSHA as well and have our own plan, but if that emergency rule is allowed to stand, we can't get less stringent than that, right? So maybe we go around it in other ways. Maybe we try to make it a safer workplace without vaccines. Maybe you could do that, but I'd be shocked if OSHA is going to approve Florida going around their presidents, So I tell you all that, and there's 22 states that do it. What this legislation ultimately does is gives the governor $1 million to go develop his own plan for OSHA withdrawal, to have our own plan and then go submit it to the feds. The other wrinkle I'll tell you is right now, our local governments are not under OSHA because we don't have our own plan. If the state does this, now the local governments will also be under the state OSHA plan, which means OSHA gets oversight over them, because how it works is if the state adopts its plan, it's no different than the workforce plans or other things. OSHA or some federal agency gets to oversee and approve what we do. So in some ways, and I'm going to, I know we're recording, but if you quote me on this, I'll deny it. This is some big government type stuff. And so I think the legislature is going to have to be careful with it, because we all understand the joke here, right? Where the governor specifically is frustrated with the vaccine mandates that are going on, and more specifically frustrated with the federal government that's requiring these vaccine mandates. And so this is one way to do it. But I would because I advise and you guys decide, this could be considered, quote, big government, how you're going about doing this. And it'll be interesting to see how the politics of that play out. You're probably not going to see a lot of Democrats yell big government and criticize, because that's typically where they are at. Like, more government is better in our lives, but it'll be some interesting politics. At the end of the day, I think this gets passed. I think the governor puts together a plan. And if they go forward with it, it'll be maybe modestly more protective of workers than it was previously. And it just kind of goes away quietly, because again, I don't think Florida wants to be in the business of putting more regulations on employers on workplace safety, as much as we want all workers to be safe, right? But I don't think they want to be in the business of putting more regulations on our employers for workplace safety. That's just going to increase our costs, what have you. But we'll see. It'll be interesting where to go. So I tell you all this. Go ahead.
Would you mind if I jump in a quick question on that one in particular? Do you view that one in particular, the OSHA withdrawal, because of the stipulations you've talked about, and I've actually had some conversations with our internal folks about that particular issue, that could be a little more of a point of political posturing that kind of quietly fades away from what the legislature actually gets done during the special session?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, this is your political grenade, right?
Yeah.
Withdrawing from OSHA sounds really good to your red meat conservative, like anyone who's anti-government, because it sounds like you're like telling the feds, hey, stick it, we're going to do our own thing. In reality, though, which is what I was trying to explain, is
Yeah.
it actually creates more oversight. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Okay.
My wife is a recovery and employment lawyer. So when I told her that, she laughed. She's like, good luck. She lived under OSHA for a long time. And it's just, that's not the way it's designed. And if you withdraw, you're just essentially saying, well, we want a stronger plan. We still have to do everything they tell us. We just can do a little more. I don't think the governor is going to increase vaccine protections I don't think he's going to go that direction. The other thing I would tell you, and I didn't even mention it on the bullets because it's kind of it's a political thing. If you recall, when they did the vaccine passport legislation, they did it in a statute that already required or allowed the Surgeon General, like Secretary of Department of Health, to require vaccines and of certain citizens or groups that come in. This is a Jeb Bush era holdover, which think of the Elian Gonzalez days where we had a lot of folks were fleeing Cuba. We were having that second wave of folks fleeing Cuba, and there was and coming from other parts of the state, right? Immigration has always been a hot topic in a state like ours, but there was this perception of, hey, we want them here, but they've got to have all the same vaccines as a Florida resident would already have, and so there was this holdover thing that, by the way, never got used, but they passed in the law back in the 90s, allowing for the Surgeon General to require vaccines of certain individuals or what have you. And so it's never been used, but when it was in this law, when you read the law, right, if you're not familiar with reading legislation and the underlined stuff is new, the strike through stuff is going away, and you just read it, and the first time you're reading it, there's a whole paragraph of the Surgeon General can require a vaccine of anyone that they think they needs to have a vaccine. Like, people started freaking out that are in the anti-vax crowd and what have you. And the governor, he was going around the state giving, doing the road show of look how great we did. And he was getting beat up by some conservative pockets in the Republican Party of, why'd you pass this law that requires, that says we have to take a vaccine whenever? And he's like, I didn't do that. And I'm reading it right here. And he's like, yeah, well, that was already there. Well, why didn't you get rid of that law? And I'm like, well, that wasn't the focus. We were just trying to do the vaccine passport. So that bill is filed. That law will go away. Alex Andrade has it in the House, and I was talking with him the other day. They were talking about it's a set piece to elevate the conversation. It's never been used, that law, but they are going to pass it and strip away that language. Which I guess, why not, right? If it's never been used before, we probably won't need it again. But those are the four bills essentially. This is all cooked. If anything changes, I would be shocked. So when you guys watch this in the committees, the only thing I'm wondering is there's going to be 2 committee meetings in the House and Senate, 2 each. Do the moms and dads that love the masks or the moms and dads that hate the masks show up to Tallahassee to talk on this legislation? That'll be the real interesting thing, I think. I think you'll see that, but I don't know. Fortunately, we are in a very low point of this pandemic as far as the numbers, so everyone's a little safer. So we'll see where that goes, but nothing like a special session to get us warmed up for the 2022. So back to our regularly scheduled programming here. As of this morning, there were 1,100 bills filed for the 2022 legislative session. A lot of those are appropriation bills. So it's, from a policy perspective, it's probably closer to 700 bills. And that's House and Senate. You're going to see this year a couple things. Obviously, those bills. Election year politics, and I can talk a little more on that. You have the governor and all the cabinet members up for election, or their offices are up for election. You have, because it's redistricting, you have all 120 House members and all 40 Senate members, because when they do redistricting, your seats are up again. And then you have this whole state versus Fed, right? We'll talk about it with the budget, because we're grateful for the feds for the $5 billion, but otherwise you're going to see a lot of, well, tell the feds they don't get to come into our business and vice versa. And you're going to see those politics play out this session. Let's talk about the budget. The one thing they have to pass, and you all know this, The one thing they have to pass is the budget. Unlike the feds, we can't borrow to pay off our budget or this and that. It has to be a balanced budget every single year, and it has to pass, or else they're all in violation of our Constitution. The governor, you probably noticed, is making the rounds. He earlier this week was having press conferences on education about more raises he wants for teachers, workforce funding, what have you. And you're going to start seeing more of that. 30 days prior to session, he's constitutionally required to give his budget recommendations. Now, what's interesting is he has a great relationship with this legislature. And what I say that is, not that Governor Scott didn't and others, but typically when the governor gives you your budget recommendations, right, the 1,000-page document, legislature takes that and puts it to the far end of that desk, right? Like they'll take it under advisement, but they're not taking the cues from the governor on stuff. With this governor, he's done a good job of making inroads with the leadership. They are going to take into account what the governor wants in his budget, especially the high-level stuff. And so it's important what he puts in his budget, because I will promise you that's going to have, especially in an election year where he's up for re-election and everyone knows he's considering running for president one day, they're looking to make this governor look good, and they're not going to embarrass him by taking some of his priorities and putting them in the wastebasket. So pay attention to that. But within 30 days of the legislative session, he needs to do it. So that's probably the first week of December. You'll see that budget officially get rolled out. The revenue outlooks continue to look great. This time last year, everyone's hair was on fire if you were an appropriation lobbyist, because it looked like there was zero money left. And it didn't look like the feds were going to get their act together to provide any help for our budgets. And so we were, while I was advising all our clients to put in for appropriations, I was also in the same time speaking out of the other side of my mouth and saying, but we're probably not going to get any. But you can't get anything unless you don't ask. Meanwhile, fast forward, the outlooks were looking good last session, and then the feds dropped $10 billion on us. Everything worked out. This year, we are far surpassing our estimates each month over month. Like it's a kudos to the governor, our businesses, everyone else. Florida's economy is going again. So there will be money, general revenue. Not to mention, you'll see that second to last bullet. There's $5 billion in CARES Act that's still sitting out there. They spent $5 of the $10 billion last year. So we're hearing stuff like major road projects. We're hearing major infrastructure projects that they may try to spend some of this money on. They're looking to use that money on not special projects, right? So we know in Seminole County, we've got all of our cities in the county have their special projects. And we also got Seminole State and the school board that'll have some projects. This is not what those dollars will likely go to. They'll likely go towards FDOT for some major road projects. They could go towards some education initiatives, both at the higher education and the K-12 level. They're looking not to spend those dollars on special projects, because the thing is with special projects, even though they're not recurring, we typically all come back and ask again for that similar project money every year. And so they don't want to set a precedent that this $5 billion is available for that. And then there's the infrastructure bill. We all saw miraculously Biden and Pelosi and company were able to get that to the finish line. There's 13 Republicans that are getting a lot of hate mail from their constituents and members for helping pass that. But it did pass. And frankly, regardless of how you feel about those politics, it is good for Florida, assuming those dollars are able to start trickling down to us. That'll be a lot of extra dollars to go on top of some of these CARES Act dollars for major road projects, which will help, because as we know in Seminole County, and have y'all heard the term SOLO recently? I've heard that referred to our region, no longer Central Florida, but SOLO, Seminole, Orange, Lake, and Osceola, because I think you got to count Lake as a bedroom community now to the greater commercial region. They feed into both Seminole and Orange. So SOLO is going to be a real beneficiary of these CARES Act dollars and the infrastructure bill, because as we know, we're finishing off Wekiva Parkway. There's still tons of roads, state roads and county roads within Seminole and around the area that need to be upgraded and expanded. So those dollars are great for our community, because we're going to need those if we're going to continue to deal with the additional growth that we've had over the last 10 years. All right, major issues. Data privacy. Last session, the speaker, the president, and the governor literally got every single thing they wanted. I talked to Blaise Ngolia a couple weeks ago about some issues, and I said, well, what is your major issue? Or what are they? And he goes, literally, that they went hunting and they shot all the birds in the tree last year. Like there are no birds left to shoot. And that's why you're not seeing a lot of legislation move. But the one bird that they did not shoot was data privacy. Now, you guys are probably familiar with this. It polls well, both in Republicans and Democratic circles. If you've noticed on your iPhone or your Samsung recently, when you open up an app, it says, can we use your data when you're not using the app, or only when we're using the app, or never? That is because in other states, they passed laws like this that says you can't use someone's data for certain things. And so just across the board, they're now getting permissions, your consent, if you will. This bill was going to do a couple things. It was going to make clear that, let's use, for example, Uber. If you go get an Uber, whatever, they've got a lot of your information, right? They've got not only credit card and stuff, but they've got, your travel frequencies, like a lot of just of your likes and dislikes, whether it's on your food or on your rides. If they sell your data, right, they say Ben likes to travel in these areas and has this kind of budget. If they sell that without your consent, that's a big no-no, right? This bill will cover that. And that is the Attorney General will come down hard and smack hard on that. There's a large part of that bill that will just, like the stuff we talked about getting your consent to use your data for various different things, that says your data is your data. So if you don't want to consent to having your data used on certain things, it won't be used. Great. Everyone seems to agree on that. The House, the Senate, and the governor. Where this issue fell off the rails last year, or went off the rails, was the House, Speaker Sprowls wanted to have a private cause of action for any breaches of that data. And when I say breaches, means which Uber, Disney, hotel chains, all the major tech giants, Netflix, you name it, they're trying to get hacked constantly, right? Like we hear about it all the time. Like we hear about it when big places like Sony gets hacked and all the emails come out of executives, but they are constantly trying to get hacked. And then these pirates, as they call them, they come in and they say, okay, we've hacked you. We've taken all this information for a blank amount of dollars. We'll give it all back and we'll put a patch on it and we'll go away. It's become a black market business. That happens all the time. So the Senate and the governor took the position of like, I don't know if we want a private cause of action. We want John Morgan suing, whoever every time there's a data breach, because data breaches happen all the time, no matter how much money you spend. So what the bill does, and the Senate was leaning towards, was put a lot more requirements on what you have to do for your fortress. But if you get breached, it would be the Attorney General's decision whether they want to pursue claims against the company if the breach. I think this is the right way to land on this, not to oversell, is if you get breached and you have a terrible infrastructure, well, that's on you and you should be in trouble, right? Because you're taking people's information and you're not better protecting it. But if you get breached and you have like one of the best fortresses there is, but you just, the Snowdens of the world was able to hack in and get it. I mean, the Pentagon can't even keep their information protected half the time. I think that should be the Attorney General's decision to go, they did all they could. It's not their fault. We're not going to let John Morgan sue them for this. So that's where the rubble is. The speaker apparently still wants a private cause of action. The Senate and the governor has said that they don't. I would not be shocked if this bill dies or if it passes watered down, but I don't think it'll pass unless the private cause of action goes away. The business community is pretty upset about that. They're worried it's going to leave them very much exposed. There's a Virginia law that is what we've been modeling a lot of it after. That the Senate and the governor that basically does everything the speaker wants except for that private cause of action. Interesting note, if they put that private cause of action in there, our data privacy law would be more liberal in California. So that's the kind of rub we're talking about. In California, they have a very liberal data privacy law, and they have, as of last session, over 100 class action lawsuits that were active on data privacy for their trial bars. I don't think we want Florida to turn into the trial bar state for data privacy, but maybe we do. We'll have to see where they land. Okay, Ben, you and I are in agreement on that. So water quality, no surprise here. The governor nearly 4 years ago, said he wanted $1 billion plus for water and to improve that. This is extremely important for Seminole and the greater Central Florida area. You're going to see more funding on that. You're going to see more dollars on that. Senator Broder, as we know, he's filed some wetland classification legislation, which will be key for helping the state DEP better identify wetlands that need to be protected, which ones are more at risk. And frankly, so that's the environmental side. I think this is a very pro-development side, because here's the truth. If you're trying to get into development, and our area is going to continue to be developed just like South Florida and others, if you put your foot in the ground and it's even somewhat wet, the feds call that wetland. And then you got to go through a whole new process of how you get permitted. Some of that's been turned over to the state. And so that's fine, but that's not the wetland you're necessarily protecting, because shoot, I go in my yard certain times of the day and it's wet because, I guess I don't have good enough drainage. This is one of those things where if you can go better classify the wetlands we need to protect and the ones that are at risk, that'll make it more clear to the developers. here's the area you can go develop without much headaches or hurdles. And then look, yeah, will they try to go develop the other area eventually? Maybe, but hopefully the state will have better judgment to protect those areas for our grandchildren, great grandchildren, what have you. But I think this is a win-win if that can happen, because it'll allow developers to know where they can go and allow the state of Florida to protect it. Texas-style abortion. I don't normally in front of a business group or ever talk about abortion legislation, because as you all know, folks who run for office, they have already made up their mind on this. Like, I have yet to meet someone when you ask them about abortion or pro-life, I haven't really thought about it much. People know exactly where they stand on this issue. So why do I bring this up then? Texas passed a law that is the Supreme Court it appears they're going to review now, the U.S. Supreme Court. But the law, it was more than just you can't have an abortion law, right? And conservative states, that's where the laws tend to go. And Roe v. Wade says you can't outright outlaw it. So states get more and more creative on how they outlaw it without outlawing, right? The Texas style law was essentially requiring people to snitch, pardon the slang term, but to turn in other people if they know that they were going to get an abortion after a certain stage, going so far as if you're an Uber driver and you have someone in your car that you're taking them and dropping them off to a clinic, you had to turn them in. And if you didn't, you would get in trouble. So full disclosure, we represent Uber and we represent other folks that would be affected by this. This lit a lot of people's hair on fire. They're saying, look, we get it. This is a hot topic issue. We're trying not to get in the way of the pro-life, pro-choice thing. It's kind of like the guy in the bar, like, don't bring me into this. I don't want to fight. The business community is like, leave us out of this. I have talked to folks in both the House and Senate, mostly the Senate, that say you will not see this type of legislation this year in the Senate. That being said, it's a political year because of the elections. I would not be shocked if the legislation gets filed. There's one piece of legislation that's filed that doesn't go quite as far as Texas, but there's another that could be filed. I'll tell you this is because when these bills get to the floor, you lose a day of work. We already know it's going to pass. These are partisan. These are party line votes. This will be a one-day debate and another day, or 1 day for amendments and another day for debate. That's 2 days on the House or Senate floor that you lose forever if you're trying to lobby and get other stuff done. Not to mention, if it draws in the business community, now you've got a whole lot of other issues with it. So that's why I bring this up. Is it will, if it's a Texas style, as they call it, this will have business issues tagged to it, which is problematic. And it also will take up a lot of the air in the room and cause problems in Tallahassee. So just pay attention to it, because when you hear that, we always say bills are dying when those bills are going through the House and Senate, because just nothing else gets done. Chris knows what I'm talking about. But pay attention to that. Elections. I think everyone thought that we were done with elections laws after last session. Georgia did a big change, which cost them the MLB All-Star game. We've all heard about that. Florida did a similar law, not quite the Georgia level, but it was similar and it had its critics. I represented Mike Hertel, who was supervisor of elections here for 10 years. We had DOJ down our throats every election cycle, and every year we were able to push them back. They were always concerned about voting issues in Seminole County. But I can tell you, having done the general counsel work for that office for 10 years, there are people that are up to no good. There is no question in my mind that happens. Is it frequent? No, but it does happen. Ballot harvesting, all that, misinformation, intimidation, it is all a real thing and sad, and we're not the only state that deals with it. Does the state solve the issues with some of this legislation? Yes and no. To be honest, some of this is politics and we can't take the politics out of politics. Some of it is legitimate, right? It is, we want to make sure that these drop boxes are secure. We want to make sure that, polling place campaigning is not bribery, it's not intimidation, what have you. This year, the governor came out, and I think the legislature is going to go with it, that he wants to better secure the drop boxes. He has grave concerns over those. He wanted to better tighten up the vote by mails, than what we did last year. And there's a few other things. What is this about? If I can tell 2 things. One, I truly believe this governor does want to make sure our elections are secure. But there's also, if you are in the Republican circles, you know that there's a wing of the Florida Republican Party that still thinks our election results, the ones that voted for Trump, were not legitimate, that he should have won by more. And there, you've heard them saying that they want to audit the elections. Now, they may be right. I don't know. I don't think they are. I think the results are pretty secure if you look at the turnout and everything. But the governor cannot dodge this. He's been going to Reagan Day dinners and Lincoln Day dinners across the state more recently, now that he's in campaign mode. And they keep bringing this up, this certain wing of the party of, hey, audit the elections. I want to audit the elections. So this is his ability. This is his attempt from my perspective, to tamp some of that down is to say, I hear you, we'll make the elections more secure. We'll make these drop boxes harder to get access to. We'll make vote by mail more secure, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's going to tamp down. I think whether it's Republican or Democrat, when you get fringe parts of the party that are focused on something like this, that doesn't go away. It is what it is. So he's going to have to deal with that. But we are going to have an election bill again. And I'm sure CNN and all the news networks, MSNBC is going to tell everyone how the state is penalizing voters again. Preemption, last one. It's not a legislative session unless they're going after preemption. And like I said, I represent a lot of local governments, so it's always my cross to bear, as we joke up there. But they're gonna pass things. There's one pretty onerous one, which is interesting. They're gonna put the business community and the local governments a little bit at odds. Travis Hudson has it in the Senate, and I'm gonna say his last name, Guillaume Lombardo, has it in the House. It is a bill that requires anytime you pass an ordinance to have a business impact study done on it, and to show that it would not have a negative impact on businesses. I don't think this passes. If you know Kathleen Passidomo in the Senate, who's the incoming Senate president, this isn't something she probably wants to pass, and I think she can probably shut it down. That being said, it'll be interesting, right? Of course, if you're in business, and all of us are, even if we care about our local governments, yeah, we don't want an ordinance that impacts our business. On the flip side, if this was to pass, the cost alone to do these studies for everything would be quite significant and take away from these local governments. And oh, by the way, if we've been in the business long enough, we know that studies can say whatever we want them to say, right? Like, again, not to pick on the John Morgans of the world, when they get an expert witness on a medical malpractice, they hire the expert witness because they know this expert witness almost always finds that the doctor is at fault and says so. They, just like the defense is going to find witnesses that always say the doctor did nothing wrong. Same thing with studies. You can find a business impact study that said this won't harm business at all. And so I think this bill goes away, but it has certainly got local governments up in arms a little bit. You're going to see a lot on this. The last couple sessions, you've seen preemption issues on impact fees, and now you're going to start to see that shift to mobility fees. I wouldn't be shocked if with the electric vehicle charging station ordinances that you're seeing pop up around the state, if they do something on that to take away the rights of cities to require those on commercial developments. But every session there's preemption and it happens. So be prepared for that. And then I'll get to this and we can close out and answer any questions, Chris, if you guys have any. Redistricting. Once every 10 years, or if you're the Senate and you get your maps done wrong, it's once every 5 years. That's my little joke there from last time. So here's the quick rundown. Every 10 years, there's a census, as we know. They're a little delayed this year because of the pandemic. The census results came in late, but now we know that we're going to have one more congressional seat. And I'll talk about that. And we have to redraw our maps, right, to make sure that they're equitably distributed. What does equitably distributed mean? Well, in Congress, that means no different than one person. So if Seminole County has like the Stephanie Murphy seat has 1 million people in it, the Orange County centric seat can have at 1,000,001 or 999,000. It can't have any more difference because it has to be almost identical. That's for Congress. For the House and Senate seats, they can have a variance of up to 10%. Now, that's relevant because in our Constitution, which was passed about 12 years ago, there was a League of Women Voters Initiative, Fair Districts, that requires for compactness, that requires for respecting city and county boundaries where you can. It says you can't favor or disfavor incumbents, and you can't favor or disfavor parties. And so that's the compactness and geographical boundaries are where it's real relevant on this variance, because think of the Panhandle. You can't have a Senate seat in the Panhandle to make it work. You need to have like almost 7 counties to get the critical population. And so if you had to have a difference of only one person, you would be cutting counties in half to get that number. So that gives them some flexibility to go, okay, we're just going to do all the coastal counties on the Panhandle go to this senator, and all the border counties in the Panhandle above the coast go to this person. And you'll have a bit of a variance, but it's easier, right? Because when you're running for office, where do you live? Oh, I live in Escambia County. Okay, this is your senator. Well, I live in, Bay County. This is your senator. That makes it very easy and it makes more sense, right? You don't want to have people go, well, do you live on the cross street? Like 10 years ago, this is what we used to do. Do you live on the cross street of this or that? But on this side of Highway 95, but not on that. I mean, it was confusing. Half the time people did not know who their congressman was unless they were like in smack dab middle of the seat. I don't have up there. The other thing that you have to take into account for congressional seats is minority access. the Voting Rights Act of the reason DOJ was coming to pick on Mike Ertel and I for all those years and Seminole County is because we have a high Hispanic population that's mostly Puerto Rican. And Voting Rights Act says that, if you're a flag-born citizen, U.S. flag-born citizen, you have to have access to the ballot. So it was the language issues. The other part of the Voting Rights Act is that minority access seats. And so I say this is that is where it gets tricky because you can't tinker with those seats much at all to get these balances. And as a result, you get some really oddly shaped seats for the minority access seats. I always pick on Corinne Brown. Where the map I've got up there is the Tampa Bay area, so it's not good. But if you recall, Corinne Brown's seat when she served in Congress started in Jacksonville on the other side of the St. Johns River and whittled its way all the way down to downtown Orlando. Literally covered a 2.5-hour drive if you're driving fast, and it would literally go down the river. And just sometimes like Oregon Trail type, like you ford the river, it would just take the river down a couple miles and then go hop into a neighborhood, pick up some voters, hop back in the river and go down. It was the strangest drawn seat. It made no sense. There's no communities of interest in downtown Jacksonville and downtown Orlando. But there it was. Now they fixed it by just going west with her seat. They go Jacksonville west, and it got controversial because they picked up some prisons last time. And because technically you have to count prisoners in your data, even though prisoners don't vote. So that's interesting. I tell you all this, it creates a lot of politics. I'll tell you what the Senate maps released just earlier this week, and then I'll talk about the politics. You see that last bullet, the Senate released their first drawings of the Senate and Congress, 4 maps for each. The maps are pretty similar with just a little divergence between each. What interesting for Central Florida, not much changed in the Senate seats, although a little bit. I came real close to getting Broder. I live in Baldwin Park in Orlando, and it comes right down. I'm kind of mad I don't get him. But his former aide, Katie Flory, my teammate, he gets her. She gets that little part of Orlando, so lucky her. But the congressional seats, everyone kept saying, oh, Central Florida's going to get one. Central Florida's going to get one. They're right, but they thought it was going to be smack dab where we all are in Seminole, Orange County. They actually put that seat in Lakeland, Polk County area with like the real southern edge of Lake County. This is interesting. That I don't know who is thinking they're going to run, right? Someone like a Kelly Stargell would make sense. She's termed out. She's well known in that area. But that seat is going to be a very Lakeland Central seat. So I don't know who's going to jump into that, but someone will. And the Murphy seat, if you looked at it, appears to be pretty safe. Anything can change. The people I trust, like those people who study maps, say that in all 4 versions of the Senate congressional seat map, and we haven't seen the House yet, so that could change. It would seem to suggest that seat is, in most years, going to be a coin toss leans Democratic, and you've got someone like Stephanie Murphy, who's pretty middle of the road Democrat. She criticizes Pelosi constantly. She would be safe. It says if there's a Republican wave, there's nothing she can do, right? Or anyone can do, right? That would probably trend Republican. But interestingly enough, I think a lot of folks thought Murphy was going to be targeted in these redistricting, and it looks like she's generally going to be safe. We'll see how that all goes. Congressman Soto from Osceola County, his seat had to shrink the most. It was the biggest of everyone's down in Osceola County. It was by 100,000 voters. It was built right now after 10 years. So his shrunk, but his should be safe, even though the NRCC is going to target him. I've heard they may change that targeting now that they've seen the seat, because I don't think that's a seat that they can win, but we'll see. And most people say it was a fair map. They say the only seat that the Republicans picked up was the new one, which makes sense. They're in charge of the maps, and there's one extra seat for Florida. That's Congress District 28, and that'll be Lakeland area. But pay attention to this, because here's what's interesting. 10 years ago, when the House released their maps, about 30 members were drawn out of their seats, 30 out of 120. The Senate had none drawn out of their seats, and that's why their maps were challenged successfully, because you can't favor or disfavor incumbency. But in this leadership-driven process, right, you've got a process where the Speaker, especially in the House, and the Senate President, to some extent, like what they decide is going to happen. And now you've got 30 members that they wake up the next day and they're not even coming back, and they thought they were coming back, Republicans and Democrats. That changes the politics in the House and in the Senate if that happens there, because they're untethered, if you will. They don't care what the Speaker says or the Speaker's chief of staff, because they ain't coming back. So they're going to maybe take some votes a little differently than they would have done before. We saw that 10 years ago. I would not be shocked if you see that 10 years later. And it's multiple reasons. One, they're untethered. You already have the politics of the incoming Speaker, in this case, it's Renner, is starting to rise in power, and the outgoing Speaker is waning in his power. all these politics create some real interesting votes at the end because you've got these like free agents, if you will, whereas normally in a regular session, you do what the speaker tells you to do, or you're going to lose an appropriation, or you're going to get dinged on one of your bills, what have you. It's very militaristic and somewhat in the Senate, but very much so in the House. That changes when you got redistricting. The last thing I'll say this, you can't take the elephant out of the room. We all probably know of a House member in Lake County named Anthony Sabatini that has announced he was going to run for the newly created congressional seat. And he was showing up at a lot of Seminole County events because, well, a lot of people thought it was going to be Seminole County. What I'm also not going to break news on here is he is not exactly in good graces with the speaker. The speaker, after some unfortunate tweets and comments by Sabatini over the summer and the off session, moved his office to the basement of the House floor. That wasn't on accident, okay? I say all that, and they'll never admit it, but I'll say it as if it's gospel. These congressional seats, both in the House and Senate, were drawn with a specific eye of making sure that a certain individual would not have an easy route to go win and take that seat. To make no mistake about it. So the fact that it's Lakeland Central doesn't surprise me, because that's probably the one area someone like Representative Sabatini could not just crack in there and win a primary. There's that's old school politics, right? Like that's the only county that went for Putnam against DeSantis, right? Like these folks, they beat to a different drum when it comes to the Republican Party. So does he mean he doesn't run and win? No, I mean, anything's possible, right? Politics are always interesting, but I would say his path to Congress got a little harder with these maps. We'll have to see what the House does, but I don't expect the House to do him any favors. Now, interestingly enough, the Senate maps draw a mostly Lake County Senate seat. So Baxley is likely to take that seat. He might have to technically move to the Lady Lake area or Leesburg, and he's done a good job representing Lake County. But what will be interesting is, does a Sabatini say, well, forget it, I'll just run in Lake County since it's mostly a Lake County seat now? I don't know. It's going to make for some fascinating politics. Again, like I said, these are the kind of things that create all kinds of fissures in the closing days of session, because people who didn't think they were running against each other start running against each other. You already heard Mike Gricko in the House say that now he's thinking about Senate District 38 because of the way it's drawn, which creates some friction. Gotta love politics. So it's going to be a great session. I say that seriously. There's going to be a lot of money for projects. If you guys are part of an organization that typically gets appropriations, the due date in the House is next Wednesday by 5 p.m. to get the House form in. In the Senate, you could have a form filed the day before the budget arrives, and it would be technically allowed. But I tell you all that, and non-recurring projects are going to get a lot of attention this session. They're going to be a lot of opportunities for dollars because they're doing well. Recurring dollars are tough. They don't want to fund recurring projects because it's, then they got to keep funding them, and that puts a burden on the budget. So if you belong to organizations, whether it's a city, a county, or a nonprofit, highly encourage you to raise your flag on that and try to go get some dollars, because they will be available. And then with that, I can answer any questions or give your time back.
I have a question.
Sure.
Going back to the vaccine mandate, obviously we got a lot of questions here from both business owners and employees. And one that I've gotten a couple times and I don't really have an answer for is, when businesses are requiring the vaccine, you have to go show proof you got the vaccine or whatnot. Is that a HIPAA violation? Can a business compel you to give away medical information when there's no, how's that kind of stopping someone saying, well, do you have this vaccine? Did you do this? What medications are you on?
No, it's interesting. And HIPAA has been interpreted quite a bit this summer by people who are not doctors and or people who drafted it. And I don't pick on anyone because it's confusing. But HIPAA gives you a right of privacy, meaning if you, Ben, require it and you now know that Chris is vaccinated because he turned it in, you are not allowed to turn over that information to anyone. HIPAA protects your information. So when I turn over to my employer, information as they're trying to get me insured, did I have cancer previously, or have I had this ailment or that ailment? HIPAA says that they can't give that information away, just like it also says that my doctor can't give away that information without my permission. But you, your employer, just requires for measles, mumps, and what have you, they can require that right now. Now, I think the governor wanted to go far enough to say that you couldn't require that, and obviously they couldn't ask, but they can ask you. And now you can always say, no, and lose your job or whatever the consequences is, even if you're vaccinated or not, right? You don't have to turn over that information, but you will have employment consequences if you do so. I mean, there's some theories. There were theories that Kyrie Irving, let's use that as an example, was vaccinated, but just to make a point, wasn't going to tell anyone who was vaccinated because he, that's Kyrie Irving if you follow the NBA. But no, HIPAA doesn't stop your employer for asking. Now, OSHA, interestingly enough, to go back to that to do a callback, OSHA and certain federal laws says you can't ask certain things of employees or potential hires, right? You can't ask if they're married. You can't ask how old they are. Like some of these things as you're doing potential hires, they obviously find that out when they hire you because they get your social and everything else. And they realize, oh, he said he was 50, 60. But they can ask for that. HIPAA does not keep you from them asking, but it does keep them from giving that information away to someone else and or your doctor or your healthcare provider giving that away.
But does that become implied? If a business says all of our employees are vaccinated, therefore just give away that you're vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and what I would put a bow on that and say HIPAA is primarily aimed at healthcare providers. It's not as stringent on businesses because for the same reason, right? Like, I mean, healthcare, it's one thing. You go there, it's like going to see your priest or your lawyer, right? There's certain, like, this is the trust tree. I can tell you whatever, and you can't tell anyone else. Whereas you go to work, like, there's not the same thing, right? You just assume all your work emails are public until otherwise.
I know.
Because they control your emails, right? So you're onto something, Ben. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's not quite, at least as I understand HIPAA, it's not quite as stringent on what an employer can share as opposed to what a healthcare provider. Again, same thing we saw with Department of Health. Remember, very early days of the pandemic, the governor did not want to release the virus rates of the infection rates of certain counties, and they were claiming because it was a HIPAA violation to do so. They quickly got shot down on that in court. Like, the press called them out on it and the judges, all, even conservatives, yeah, that's not HIPAA violations to say percentage of what have you. And because they even tried to say, well, what if it's only one infection in a county and everyone knows this person's in, yeah, doesn't matter. That's not what this is about. So it's tricky, and we're in such gray area right now. Like, whoever thought of business, like to do a gold certified as saying we're all vaccinated, like this we're living in strange times, right? And our laws aren't always built for these kind of strange times. And that's one of those things, right? It's most of us assume our company is not allowed to give away this information, and some of the information they're 100% not allowed to give away. And your vaccination status as like a blanket statement, we're all vaccinated, that is not, as I understand it, as protected. And you can see it even in the NBA, right? Like it's like, everyone knew Kyrie wasn't vaccinated before he even said it because he was the only one not participating and there was no violations. Like, so it's weird. We're in strange days. I don't envy being the actual employer that has to make some of these decisions.
Right. It's just be weird. I get the question, asked that question, and I've been, posed it several different ways. And I'm like, I don't know. I think that during special session, we're hopefully going to see something kind of fleshed out on this.
Yeah, Ben, I'm going to make a couple calls after this and I'll pop you an email because that's a great question. I don't know the fine line there of what happens. Like if you're saying 100% vaccinated, I'm going to ask some of my employment folks what they think about that. Because my employment folks are the ones who turned me on to the fact that going away from OSHA is not really going away. You're actually going closer to OSHA by having your own plan. So I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's not how it's being portrayed, but we'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time this morning. This information was invaluable, and good luck on these 2 upcoming sessions.